What do you think the will of D really is? Imu clearly showed disgust toward the D, so it likely traces all the way back to the time of Joy Boy, 800 years ago. And the one who inherited that will 24 years ago was Roger. He even said he wished he had been born in the same era as Joy Boy, which shows just how deeply he resonated with Joy Boy's ideas. And Roger's words capture the core of One Piece world, and they center around the three major themes. 受け継がれる意志、時代のうねり、人の夢. The inherited will, the flow of time, and people's dreams. Today, I want to focus on inherited will, 受け継がれる意志. Just as it sounds, it's the idea of one generation will being passed on to the next one. And I think that very idea stand in direct contrast. An antithesis to what we are seeing now in Elbaf arc, with the God's Knights and Imu's powers. If the D side, like Joy Boy, Roger, Oden, and Ace, believe in dying for someone greater and leaving behind a will that deeply lives on in others, then Imu and Five Elders represent the opposite. A philosophy of escaping death entirely and preserving absolute control through their own continued existence. That's why it makes sense Brooke, someone who literally experienced death and come back, is being highlighted now in Elbaf arc. I believe this theme will become even more prominent during the battle in Elbaf and the world of One Piece, because in the end, this idea of inherited will is deeply connected to meaning behind the will of D and the true nature of the One Piece itself. So in today's video, I'll explore the truth behind One Piece guided by Oda Sensei's quiet, but powerful themes about life and death woven throughout the story, One Piece. Let's take a moment to break down the power that Imu revealed. Imu has a technique known as the Devil Contract, Akuma Keiyaku, also called Aqual. It grants you an undying body and a natural physical strength in exchange for a set amount of lifespan. Now, at first glance, that might sound a bit confusing, but it's important to understand that Jumyo, which means lifespan, and the Fushi no Karada, which means undying body, they are completely different things. Lifespan refers to the length of the time the person can live. They are like expectancy. An undying body, Fushi no Karada, on the other hand, literally means a body that won't die from injury. This is likely why Soul referred to the God's Knights as Fujimi, which means undying, and when the Straw Hat called them zombies, it actually made a lot of sense. Their bodies might be able to regenerate endlessly, but just like normal humans, they probably still have a limited lifespan. That's likely why the characters like Garing and Shamrock still appear to age. The real question now is, what about Five Elders and Gunko? It looks like Saturn has had the same appearance for over 200 years, and Gunko knew who Brook was before he became a pirate, which means she's been around for at least 60 years. So that raises an interesting possibility. Maybe Imu, like Big Mom, has the ability to manipulate lifespan itself. In fact, in the chapter 1150, we saw Imu extracting a portion of Dory and Brogy's lifespan, which suggests they can also give the lifespan to someone else. If that's the case, maybe the Five Elders and Gunko are remaining their immortality by feeding off the lifespan of the others. Either the God's Knights member who signed the Devil Contract, or even regular humans brought into Marijoa. But then, there's the biggest question of all. How has Imu been able to live for 800 years with this overwhelmingly unfair, devil-like power? One clue might be Ope Ope no Mi's eternal Euro surgery. It's important to note that this surgery doesn't make anyone undying in the sense of regenerating from damage. It just makes them ageless. In Japanese, just fushi. Their body stays frozen in time, but if they are killed, they are still dead. So what if Imu underwent the eternal youth surgery to stop aging? and then made a deal with Devil. That way, even if some of their lifespan is taken, it doesn't matter. They are already functionality immortal and can keep using their demonic powers forever. And standing in direct opposition to this idea of undying life are characters like Roger and Joy Boy, people who choose to die and pass on their will instead. But there's one person out there who inherited the same will, even though he carries the blood of Celestial Dragon. That person is Shanks. Shanks comes from Figureland family, one of the original 20 kingdoms, but the person who spread his beliefs more than anyone else, the undoubtedly Goldie Roger. And you really feel that when you read the first chapter again, after seeing what's been happening in the Elbaf arc. It becomes clear just how deeply Shanks inherited Roger's will. Ironically, the chapter that highlights the theme of death the most is none other than first chapter. And no, I'm not talking about so-called psychopath moment where Lucky Roo casually eats a meat and guns down a bandit. I'm talking about that unforgettable moment when Luffy is facing death, and Shanks steps in to protect him. That's when he loses his arm. And yet, what did Shanks say in that moment? 安いもんだ、腕の一本くらい. It's a small price to pay, just an arm. And that line hits even harder now. Because compared to the God's Knights and others who have been granted undying bodies, an arm literally is a small price to pay now. When Brogy was dragged into that semi-transparent abyss by Imu and turned into a demon, it looks like he lost his arm, but shortly after, it had completely regenerated. Same with Somers, who was sliced through the arm and torso by Gabam. He seems to have recovered just fine. But Shanks gave up his own arm permanently, just to save one kid, Luffy. And that act and that choice makes him more human and more powerful in spirit than any immortal warrior. In contrast, Shanks losing his arm to protect Luffy wasn't just a powerful moment, it taught Luffy what it really means to be pirate. But looking at it now, that act might also serve as antithesis to the God's Knights. Why? Because those guys have been granted undying bodies, and with that comes a disturbing tendency to treat human life lightly. Take what they in Elbaf. They were sent on mission to take children hostage just to assert control. And while doing that, they casually started playing a game. A game that literally involving putting humans' life, in this case children's life, on the line. It seems they regularly play with a human's life like this. For them, it's just entertainment. It's just a way to pass the time. And that attitude only makes sense if you live a life with no real hardship. If you never had to risk your life for anything, if everything comes easy, then life itself starts to feel cheap. Especially other people's lives. That's the exact opposite of Roger, Whitebeard, and Odin. They lived with a totally different philosophy. They didn't waste the time on luxuries, on distractions. Every day they lived with purpose, willing to die for what they truly wanted to achieve. And if they couldn't reach that goal themselves, they had no hesitation to putting their own lives on the line so the next generation could carry that will forward. That's what Oda Sensei seems to be defining as the true pirate. Someone who has resolved to risk it all, even their life. We see this directly with Luffy. When Nami once asks him, what does being a pirate really mean? Does it mean being ready to kill someone? Luffy doesn't hesitate, and he said, 命をかける覚悟だ. It means being ready to risk your life. And that answer and that attitude stand as a direct challenge to Imu, and by extension to the Celestial Dragons. Immortal beings who toy with life as if it's nothing, that's the real contrast. One side plays with life for fun, The other puts their line on the line for something greater. This interpretation makes that scene in the first chapter feels a lot deeper. What I mean is, if you look at how strong Shanks is now, there's no way he needed to lose his arm to save Luffy. He could have taken out the Seeking and protected Luffy at the same time. No problem. Normally, he wouldn't have had to sacrifice anything, but he chose to lose his arm. Why? Because he wanted to show Luffy, through action, what it really means to be a pirate. He wanted to teach him becoming a pirate isn't just about dreams or strength, it's about risking your life for what matters. And I think the reason Shanks went that far has something to do with the fact that Luffy ate the Sun God's devil fruits. I mean, Gomu Gomu no Mi, the same fruit connected to Joy Boy. By inheriting Nika's power, Luffy is destined to carry on the will of Joy Boy, Roger, and all those who come before him, and that means one day he'll be faced to stand against the entire world. To take on a role that big, Luffy has to understand the meaning of resolve, in Japanese, kakugo, of being ready to put his life on the line. If Shanks had been one of the God's Knights with a body that could regenerate infinitely, Luffy wouldn't never learn that, resolve. A man who can die can teach the value of sacrifice. So in that sense, giving his arm to the Seeking wasn't just to save Luffy, it was Shanks' way of resisting the ideas of the God's Knights and celestial dragons like Imu and Five Elders. Plus, Shanks has been to Marijoa. He probably knows that God's Knights have undying body. That's why he understands just how important Roger's lesson really was. The value of a life laid down for a dream. And now, Shanks has a role to play in fulfilling Roger's will, to turn the world upside down. And if that moment comes, I think he won't hesitate to offer his own life like Roger. In fact, I'd even say Shanks wants to that kind of moment, a moment where he can make the same choice Roger did. That, in a way, might be how Shanks, someone born into the bloodline of a Celestial Dragon, become a true pirate. So what exactly is the will of D? I think it's opposite of the how Celestial Dragons cling to life. The will of D is about dying and still passing your will on, connecting people across generations through sacrifice. And the treasure that holds all those people's stories and ideas, that's what they call the One Piece. 一つなぎの大秘宝 One Piece. The treasure that brings everything and everyone together. Now, the word 一つなぎ literally means to connect into one. But if we think about it not as 一つ like this, I mean number one, the one thing, but other interpretation, 人, which means human, people, and person. Then it could also mean a great treasure that connects all the people who inherited the will of D through the generations. That's why I believe the true nature of One Piece ties into this theme. But as for the final answer, I leave that unsaid for now. I'd love to hear what you think, so feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments. To be honest, I think the eternal life is something every human being has thought about at least once in our life. We may wish for it, but the moment we've actually granted infinite life, I think the meaning of living would start to fall apart. Without a strong sense of purpose, most people would probably feel a deep sense of emotional and existential emptiness. When the pressure of death disappears, everything becomes vague. The things you worked so hard to accomplish might start to feel meaningless in the face of endless time, and while you stay the same, the people around you age and pass away. Watching that happen again and again would make relationship painful. Time would lose its shape. No milestones, no deadlines, just never-ending present that slowly eats away at your sense of direction. In that way, being freed from death could almost feel like being exiled from life itself. I might have gone off a bit of the tangent, but as you can see, the manga can actually teach us a lot about life itself. Even so, I know this kind of deep reflection isn't always what people are looking for on YouTube. So if you are interested in these kind of themes, I explore them more over on my page. That's it for today. See you in the next video.